Well, I'm delighted now to welcome two outsiders. Welcome back to Outsiders. He's spoken to us many times before, Alan Moran. Alan has been working on a very important project, one which has set out to find out how much you pay, your family pays, for all this virtue signalling climate change rubbish via renewables. Welcome to Outsiders. Alan, how are you, mate?
Pretty good, thank you.
Now, kick it off. Tell us about your project, what you set out to find, and then tell us the results.
Well, there's a popular number about the costs of environmental policies on the consumer, and it's particularly developed, this number, by the Australian Energy Market Commission, and it comes at $90 per year, about 6.5% of your bill. But what, in fact, that does is, although it is carefully collected, it only covers about 1/6 of the cost. It covers, for example, the cost of the renewable energy target. It covers for things like the rooftop solar mechanisms. But what it doesn't cover is various other aspects. For example, that $90 just for the regulations has to be added to other things. That is, for example, the cost of government soft loans and government grants to renewable energy, to wind and to solar, and they add about $150. Then there's the effect of the renewables in terms of, well, they have a parasitic effect on the rest of the generation by forcing out of production generation, mainly coal, which would be much cheaper to run, and therefore what has happened since the major generator of Hazelwood closed a couple of years ago, prices doubled. So if you include that doubling of prices, that's another $200 or so, which would go onto the household bill. Then we had last month the Australian Energy Market Operator coming out with numbers with a whole new spectrum of transmission lines and other measures, and we've already got the Snowy 2 in the pipeline, which is all of which is designed to shore up the inherently irregular and unpredictable renewable energy, and therefore allow it to operate. So when you add that, that's about another $70 or $75. When you add all that together, you come to not just the cost to the consumer of $90, but more like $536 per year. In other words, it's not 6.5% of your bill, of your electricity bill, but it's more like 39% of your electricity bill.
Rita.
We are told that renewables are the future, that there is no question this is just going to happen and we should embrace it and get on board quickly. Around the world, is that what's happening as well from what you've researched?
Well, it's happening in the EU and in some other Western economies, but it's not happening in China, in India, in Indonesia. So, you know, this started, Rita, with the whole notion that we've got to reduce our emission levels back to net zero at some stage. Well, that might well be we may well be moving in that direction in Australia and in the EU, but they're not in other places. And those other places actually account for about 70 or 80% of the total emissions, because it's not only those fast-growing developing countries, but it's also the United States, which has renounced the whole notion of renewables as a whole. One state, of course, hasn't renounced them, and that is California, which has had some disastrous outages over the last week, because they're about 5 years ahead of us in the renewable game. They're about 25 or 30, in fact 30% of their energy is renewables at the present time. And once when it went hot and windless, they suddenly found that they couldn't supply enough, and they had to have rolling blackouts.
So, Alan, just tell me, you say $536 per household, but that's just direct costs, isn't it? What about the indirect costs, and what are they?
You see, about half of the electricity which is consumed, a little bit less, is by households. So that 536 comes to about $6.5 billion if you multiply it by the number of households. But that's only about half the cost. So the other half of the cost brings us our total to something of the order of $13 billion per year. That's every year we're spending $13 billion in trying to get rid of coal and trying to interject renewable energy, wind and solar, in a system which is actually inherently making us much more expensive in electricity terms and is costing us considerable amounts of angst in reliability. And that's a really, really important number. $13 billion is a huge albatross around the neck of the Australian public and the Australian economy. And it's a very important one for Australia because our industries are essentially benefication and various aspects of improving on productivity in terms of agricultural and minerals. And these depend upon competitively priced energy. What we've seen, and we had not very long ago, less than 10 years ago, we had electricity which was just about the cheapest in the world. Now it's amongst the most expensive now.
James.
Alan, I want to ask you a question. With all of this money that's going to renewables, whatever the final number is and whatever the cost of distorting the market is, the end game here is bringing down global warming. So can you tell me in your calculations, did you quantify how much the global temperature or the Australian temperature would drop as a result of all of these efforts?
Well, I haven't done that, but that has been done by other people. The chief scientist offered a number a few years ago and said it was virtually nothing. The answer is that we were 1.5% of emissions. We're actually only talking in terms of energy about a third of those. So, you can sort of multiply that up and come to the answer is virtually nothing. Now, some people would say, some people would say we basically, we have to do our bit, etc. But in the end product, our bit is insignificant, but others aren't following on. The developing world will not purposefully increase the costs of their energy as Australia appears willing to do so.
So, Alan, just finally, just very briefly, so we know that whatever we do isn't going to do much. You're saying $13 billion a year, every single year of taxpayers' money, household money goes into renewables. So we know, for example, that in America, their voters there, 57% of Americans would happily pay $1 a month to solve climate change or tackle climate change. That's $12 a year. Australians are a bit more generous. They've said that they will pay on average $200 a year. They're willing to pay up to $200 a year. That was a 2020 ABC survey. $200 a year. How much? What is the grand total? In your estimate, in your exclusive report that will be going to Parliament, via Malcolm Roberts' One Nation, what is your number that you say, that you claim every single household in Australia is paying every single year for this renewables fantasy?
Well, the average has got to be around 1,300, and I'm not sure that $200 from the ABC is accurate indication of what people would be prepared to pay in Australia. I've seen much lower numbers than that. But certainly, if the 200 is correct, we're paying 6 times that 200 already in terms of the household bills we pay for electricity and the on costs that we pay for our goods and services which incorporate this more expensive electricity.
$1,300 per year. That's what Australian households are paying, according to Alan Moran, for the renewables fantasy. Well, fascinating stuff. Thanks for coming on, Alan, and well done on your work.
Thank you very much.
Well.